Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dgmg podcast. My name is Zoe Lulinski, and today I'm going to be going over my new top 10, some of the events that happened this past week, week 13, and then we're 5 weeks away from postseason, so I'll be getting into the playoff picture, and then now that we've had 3 coaches fired so far this season, I'm going to go into some of the potential candidates that could suit some of these teams. Bears, Jets, and Saints are the 3 teams that have fired their coaches. And so I'll get into it. To start, Dennis Allen was the head coach for the Saints. He was fired a couple weeks ago after, if I remember correctly, a 7-game losing streak after having a pretty strong showing those first 2 weeks. There's a couple interesting ones. Darren Rizzi is the interim head coach for now. He's a special teams coordinator for the Saints. I think one of their top candidates would be Joe Brady. He's the offensive coordinator for the Bills and came from LSU. He has a lot of history back in Louisiana. Ever since taking over that job, I think Josh Allen and just the rest of the offense have, I think he's taking advantage of their potential, especially Josh Allen. He's kind of playing to Josh Allen's strengths, and I think that's something you want to see in the coach. You don't want a coach to be stuck in their ways or forcing a player to play how they want. Someone who's able to scheme things to the players that they have it shows the possibilities they have as a coordinator. I think he's done really good with quarterback development as well, developing Joe Burrow back in LSU. So I think there's some options there. Of course, Ben Johnson is another option. He's the next Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan type of coach that people are hoping to be like the next new guy that everyone wants. He's the offensive coordinator for the Lions, so I think that's a big option for any team who's looking for a coach right now. And then Clint Kubiak, he's the offensive coordinator for the Saints at the moment. I think he's had a lot of potential. There were talks a couple of years ago about him maybe looking for or having a lot of potential as a head coach, so he'd be someone coming from within that I think could do some creative things for the Saints. Bobby Slowick, he was a big candidate last year, the offensive coordinator for the offensive coordinator for the Texans. Again, another guy who's just really good at developing quarterbacks. He worked with C.J. Stroud last year. C.J. Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons of all time. I think a guy that can develop a quarterback for the Saints is the way they'd want to go, just as I feel like they should be looking for a new quarterback. Derek Carr, I think it's time to move on for him, or at least get a guy to develop under him. Moving on to the Jets, they just fired Robert Saleh after week 5, so it's been a while. Again, Ben Johnson and Joe Brady are 2 guys to look at. Cliff Kingsbury is another guy I didn't mention. He's the offensive coordinator for Washington, the Commanders right now. He was the head coach for the Cardinals for 4 years. Had a couple high points there and a couple low points. He kind of started off hot and then got a bit worse as time went on. He worked with Kyler Murray, did a good job there, and he's doing a really great job with Jaden Daniels right now. Again, if you look at it, they started off hot and are going down a little bit. That's not anything. I mean, they're still playing pretty well. They're one of the best offenses in the league at the beginning of the season. So I'm interested to see how they go towards the end of the season, but he's another guy. Defense coordinator Brian Flores from the Vikings, he has a very unique system. They blitz a lot, and he's taken advantage of the players on the Vikings and done a great job at getting them to be one of the top defenses in the league. I think top 3 even right now. And then, don't flame me, but Rex Ryan, hey, he was a previous head coach for the Jets. He's been lobbying to get back into head coaching, and I think he's coached before. I think it's an upside when you've coached before and have that experience. He might be a dark horse for the Jets even, maybe coming back to the Jets and coaching for them. Then to stick in the defensive coordinator side, Aaron Glenn from the Lions, he's done a lot of stuff. He's a big leader type guy that I think a lot of teams are looking for. I mean, if you don't have a leader as head coach, what is your team going to be like? So, a couple guys there. Liam Cohen from the Buccaneers is another option. Now, getting to the Bears just fired Matt Eberflus after the Thursday Thanksgiving game against the Lions. I have a lot to go into there. They had a 6-game losing streak. it started off bad with that Hail Mary that they allowed against Washington and just continued to get worse. They got blown out by the Cardinals in New England, which New England was really thought to be an easy game. They had a very long home streak, and New England came to Chicago and blew them out. So that was concerning. And then the next three opponents are all playoff teams likely, and all divisional opponents, and all of those were heartbreaks. If you didn't know, Green Bay had a blocked field goal to win it. Minnesota, the Bears had the first successful onside kick of the season, then lost in overtime. And then Detroit, well, that kind of explains itself why Matt Eberflus got fired the day after that game. Didn't even let the Sunday games go. They had 30 to 40 seconds nearly in field goal range to either tie it up or, win the game. And they had a timeout as well and just didn't call it. They let the time run out. If we want to go into detail on that final drive, I think if this final drive didn't happen, the Bears still might have Matt Eberflus as head coach. But if you go into just that final drive alone, we had 3 penalties: the unsportsmanlike conduct on Keenan Allen, the offensive pass interference on Cole Kmet, and then the hands to the face on Tevin Jenkins. They allowed 3 sacks in that game as well, and 2 of those were Larry Borom. Larry Borom, he had a lot of potential, but he has allowed 6 sacks in the last 3 games he's played as a backup, going in for Darnell Wright, who has had some injury problems this season. That is inexcusable. That big sack he allowed towards the end of that final drive was huge, getting us, the play right before they just let the play run out. I just think that's inexcusable. We had 2 timeouts that we used on that drive as well, and none of them were to stop the clock. It was all because the play clock was about to end. So I just think the way that was handled was inexcusable. Obviously, the Bears felt like that too because they ended up firing him. Letting 30 seconds run off the clock like that when you're 6 yards away from field goal range and having a timeout, I think is inexcusable. But to get into possibilities of replacements, Cliff Kingsbury, like a guy I mentioned, he worked with Caleb Williams before, has a lot of experience. If you want to stick with guys who Caleb Williams has worked with, I think that might be a good idea. He is on to his second or third play caller. I mean, if we hire a new head coach with different play calling, offense coordinator, head coach, that would be his third play caller in just his rookie season and his second season alone. Thomas Brown, he's worked this as well. We got to see how Thomas Brown does as the interim head coach for the Bears, but the last 3 games, he's continued Caleb Williams' development, which I think is great. So Cliff Kingsbury and Thomas Brown, I think, are 2 guys to watch there. They're also looking for big leaders. So a guy like Mike Vrabel on defensive coordinator, I think, could completely change this team, turn the team around. Another guy like that is Thomas Brown. And then, of course, the other guys I mentioned, Ben Johnson, I think, is one of the most coveted possibilities for the whole league in general. So, of course, Ben Johnson, what he's done with the Lions, I think, is great. He has a lot of play calling experience. Now, if you want to look at that way, the guys who have head coaching experience versus not, the Bears have had poor history in picking guys on potentially doing good with no experience. Matt Eberflus, Matt Nagy. So that's interesting to look at there. And then, if fired, Kyle Shanahan and Kevin Stefanski from the 49ers and Browns, I think, are 2 guys to watch. I don't think it's going to happen. Kyle Shanahan shouldn't be fired. He's one of the best coaches in the league still, in my opinion. Kevin Stefanski should also, continue to get a chance. He had to work with Deshaun Watson. I mean, I think any coach should get another chance after doing that. So those are my opinions there. Aaron Glenn, Joe Brady are 2 other options for, any of the teams looking for coaches. But yeah, those are the top candidates, in my opinion, for these 3 teams that are going to be looking for sure. Getting into my top 10, I do have the Lions at 1. I think it's self-explanatory. They've looked top-notch. They dominated the Bears in the first half of the game, and I don't think much changed for them. The Bills at number 2. Again, they're looking like a top team. They're getting better every single week. Eagles at 3. I have the Chiefs at 4. They're continuing to struggle to win games against these bad teams, like the Raiders and Panthers. Of course, both those teams have young quarterbacks that can make plays happen, but, look, I don't think it's going to be a struggle for them once they're in the playoffs. I just think right now, I mean, there's other teams that are better for them. But they have the playoff experience. There's not really much to worry about for them there. I still think they could get to the Super Bowl and win it to get that three-peat. So, interesting to watch there. At number 5, I have the Steelers. They won a shootout against the Bengals. The defense obviously struggled against Joe Burrow. The Bengals had upwards of 30-plus points. But, I mean, that's still top 5 defense in the league. And that the offense has been showing out still, too. The Packers at 6, Vikings at 7. I think these two could kind of be flip-flopped if you want to go there. But they've both been really solid. I have the Ravens at 8, Chargers at 9, and Broncos at 10. Not much has changed on this list from last week, but I'm very confident in these rankings. I think the Broncos are really fun to watch, and the Chargers with Harbaugh have completely changed, and I think they're a fun team to watch. Now, getting into the playoff predictions, right now the Bills and Chiefs have both clinched, so they're guaranteed to make the playoffs. They're at 1 and 2. Steelers are ranked at 3, Texans at 4, Chargers at 5, Ravens at 6, and Broncos at 7. That's for the AFC. The NFC right now is the Lions at 1, Eagles at 2, Seahawks at 3, Falcons at 4, Vikings at 5, Packers at 6, and Commanders at 7. I don't think much is going to change other than a couple teams switching around for the AFC. I think the Bills are going to end up being in first place. I think the Chiefs are going to lose a couple more games. And then I think the Steelers and Ravens are going to switch around. The Ravens, I think, have a slightly easier schedule than the Steelers. However, it will depend on their head-to-head. Almost all the teams that I have flipped around really will base on who wins their head-to-head matchup. However, I do think the Ravens will win that head-to-head matchup. Broncos and Chargers, again, another one, flip-flop. All these teams tend to be divisional, so I think either way it's going to be competitive. I do think the Chargers are going to take the top spot over the Broncos. And then I don't really think much will change on the NFC side. The competition, any team that's in the wild card could easily be number 1 in their division as well. It's just I think the NFC is loaded right now with talent. I think the teams that do have an opportunity to maybe slip in there are the Cardinals and Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, I do think, are going to beat out the Falcons for that top spot in their division, so I think they'll end up being at number 4. And then I think the Cardinals and Seahawks will also switch, so the Cardinals are going to take that top spot. And then, hot take here, I think the Seahawks are going to come in over the Commanders. The Commanders have looked really good this year, and I think it's a great first year for Dan Quinn and Jane Daniels, as well as Cliff Kingsbury. But the offense the last few weeks has been struggling compared to the beginning of the season. They have a young quarterback with no experience in the playoffs. I mean, Jaden Daniels obviously is good. He played with LSU. He has experience in the spotlight, but the NFL is a whole other level. They just need to get rid of those negative plays. I feel like they've had a lot of those. The defense has been struggling a little bit more as well. I think getting Marshawn Lattimore from that trade, I think, could very much help them. So, again, very iffy. I think the Commanders could definitely make it. I think it's probably the more likely scenario, but just a hot take. I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks did make it over them. They just need to the Seahawks just need to wrap up that inconsistency that they've had. They also play the Cardinals, so that's another divisional game that's going to be really important, kind of decide where things play out. But that's it for me. Don't get me going. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.